Hello, my name is Margaret Ellis. I'm 72 years old. I never thought I would be standing at this point in my life, staring down a moment that would redefine everything I believed about myself, my family, and even what it means to truly live. Most people at my age settle into a quiet routine, let the days slip by, and focus on the comforts of habit. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was born in a small town in the Midwest, the kind of place where everyone knows your grandmother's name, your parents' history, and what kind of apple pie you bake. Life in my youth was simple and predictable, with moments of joy punctuated by small hardships.
I worked hard, loved fiercely, made mistakes, and forgave freely, or tried to. I raised a family, watched my children grow into the adults I had always hoped they would become, and eventually settled into what I assumed would be the gentle rhythm of my later years. My husband, Thomas, and I shared decades of laughter, quiet evenings, and shared sorrows. Together, we built a life full of ordinary miracles. Birthdays celebrated, grandchildren laughing in the living room, the scent of coffee in the morning sun. Yet, even amidst what seemed like a life well lived, I carried a subtle sense of unease. It wasn't overt, but sometimes I would feel a small heaviness in my chest, a little fatigue that sleep didn't fix, or a stiffness that suggested my body was starting to speak its truth in ways my mind refused to hear. I ignored these signs, telling myself it was just age catching up. After all, 72 is not old, but it is an age where the body begins to whisper the truths that the mind often refuses to acknowledge. It began subtly, the kind of change that almost convinces you it's imaginary. A twinge here, a dull ache there, nights interrupted by discomfort I couldn't explain. At first, I chalked it up to the natural progression of age. After all, my joints were older, my energy levels lower, and I had spent decades giving my body more attention to others than to myself. But over the weeks, the whispers became louder. There were moments when I would sit in the kitchen after breakfast, sipping my tea, and feel a tightness in my chest that lingered just a little too long. Nights brought strange pains, and fatigue settled into my bones in a way that was impossible to ignore. Thomas noticed before I did. He is a quiet man, careful with words, but with a perceptive eye. One evening, he looked at me across the table and said softly, "Margaret, I think you need to see a doctor." There was no accusation, no panic, just a calm, understated worry that made my heart tighten in ways I hadn't expected. I smiled, perhaps too brightly, and said, "It's probably nothing, just a bit of stress." But deep down, a seed of worry had been planted. I made an appointment with my primary care physician, a gentleman named Dr. Harris, who has known me for decades. I trusted him, not just because of his expertise, but because he had witnessed my life unfold. When I walked into his office that morning, I carried with me not only the aches and pains of my body, but also a gnawing sense of dread I refused to name. Sitting in the chair, I noticed the ticking clock on the wall and felt each second stretching in a way that made the world seem quieter, smaller, and more fragile than it had just hours before. Dr. Harris listened patiently as I described my symptoms, nodding thoughtfully, asking questions that made me realize how little I had paid attention to the body I had relied on for more than 7 decades. "Margaret," he said finally, after a long pause, "I want to run a few tests, just to be safe." His words were careful, gentle, but there was an underlying gravity I could not ignore. The days that followed were filled with waiting, a peculiar and insidious kind of torture that stretches the mind and magnifies fear. I kept myself busy, folding laundry, watering plants, arranging flowers in the living room, all the while aware of the emptiness that grew inside me. I tried to distract myself with phone calls to friends and letters to my grandchildren, but every time the phone rang or the mailbox opened, my heart skipped a beat, expecting news that I didn't want, yet secretly feared. Finally, the day of the test results arrived. I remember sitting in the quiet of my living room, Thomas by my side, holding my hand in a way that conveyed more than words ever could. When the call came, I answered with a tremor in my voice, prepared to hear anything and everything. And that's when my world shifted. The diagnosis was cancer. My mind froze for a moment, then raced. Thoughts collided in a storm. Fear of death, worry for Thomas, concern for my children, regret for things left unsaid, for chances never taken, for words never spoken. The first wave was shock. The second was anger. How could this happen now, at a stage in life where I thought I had finally settled into peace? I thought I had earned tranquility in my twilight years. Instead, I was faced with the stark reality that life had one more trial to test me, to demand a confrontation with my deepest fears. As I sat there, the reality settled slowly, insidiously. My life, as I had imagined it, would never be the same. Nights would be longer, conversations more fraught, and decisions heavier. Yet, beneath the fear, there was a whisper of something else, a tiny spark that refused to be extinguished. Perhaps this was the moment that would force me to truly see myself, to confront the regrets and the small joys with clarity I had never known. Perhaps this was the moment that would change me forever. Perfect. Let's continue with the next section, 5,000 words. This will cover Chapter 2 continuation and Chapter 3, initial response/emotional turmoil, including family interactions, internal reflections, and flashbacks, all designed to be immersive, emotional, and engaging. After hearing the words, "You have cancer," a part of me wanted to laugh. Surely, this couldn't be happening. Not now, not at 72. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry, my mouth heavy, as if the words I wanted to say, "No, this isn't real," were trapped behind a veil of disbelief. Thomas sat beside me, gripping my hand tightly, eyes fixed on mine, waiting. Waiting for what? I didn't know. Waiting for me to understand. Waiting for me to crumble? I wasn't sure I even wanted to know. In the first hours after the diagnosis, I walked through the house like a ghost. The familiar furniture seemed foreign. The walls of my home, which had been the backdrop of decades of laughter and ordinary miracles, now felt cold and unwelcoming. I looked at the photographs on the mantel, the grandchildren smiling, my wedding picture with Thomas, snapshots of birthdays and holidays, and I felt the crushing weight of mortality pressing down on me. How much time did I really have left? How many more birthdays would I see? How many more cups of coffee, how many more quiet mornings with Thomas would be mine? Thomas tried to speak, but the words faltered. He said, "Margaret, we'll get through this. We always do." His voice was calm, reassuring, but it felt like a fragile thread in a storm. I wanted to believe him, but disbelief clung to me like a second skin. I nodded, but inside, I was still screaming, still questioning, still terrified. Later that evening, the children arrived. Their faces were etched with worry, their voices careful, gentle. Emily, my eldest, held my hand and said softly, "Mom, whatever happens, we're here. We love you." Her words should have comforted me, but they also reminded me how fragile life could be. My youngest, Michael, tried to make a joke, a nervous attempt to lighten the tension, but it fell flat. We all sat in the living room, the silence stretching, heavy and suffocating. I realized something then. The fear of the diagnosis wasn't mine alone. It belonged to every person who loved me, every life I had touched, every moment I had left unfinished. The thought was overwhelming. I had lived a full life, yes, but full of gaps too. Words unspoken. Apologies never made. Regrets buried deep. I had spent years thinking I had time to do everything I wanted, to say everything I needed to say, and now, time felt like a thief who had arrived early. In the days that followed, I floated between denial and fear. I tried to convince myself the diagnosis was a mistake. Perhaps there had been an error in the lab. Perhaps the doctor had been mistaken. Every morning, I would wake and tell myself, maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just stress. Maybe it will go away. I went about my daily routines, making breakfast, folding laundry, watering the garden, pretending that life continued as normal. But even the act of pretending felt hollow. Every step, every small task, reminded me of the fragile thread on which my existence now hung. At night, the fears returned in waves. Alone in my room, I would stare at the ceiling, imagining the worst-case scenarios. The treatment, the pain, the possibilities. None of it was pleasant. I thought about Thomas, about leaving him alone, about the children, about grandchildren who might grow up without me. And then, just as swiftly, a small spark would flare inside me. I cannot let fear define the rest of my life. It was an almost imperceptible thought, but it was enough to hold me in the storm. As the days passed, my mind wandered to memories I had tucked away for decades. I remembered my childhood summers, the scent of grass and sunshine, the laughter of siblings and friends long gone. I remembered my wedding day, the excitement and fear mingled together, the promise made to Thomas that no matter what, we would face life as partners. I remembered raising my children, the sleepless nights, the triumphs and failures, the quiet victories and unnoticed sacrifices. And then, inevitably, the regrets surfaced. The words I never said. The apologies I never offered. The moments when pride kept me silent instead of seeking understanding. I thought of friends I had lost touch with, of opportunities one had let pass, of dreams abandoned or forgotten. I realized that my illness had forced a confrontation not just with death, but with myself. It was as if life had whispered in a voice that could not be ignored. Look at what you have neglected. Look at what you have postponed. Time is no longer your ally. One night, in the quiet of our home, Thomas and I sat together in the living room. The room was dark except for the soft glow of a lamp in the corner. He held my hand, and for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. The denial, the fear, the panic, all of it still lingered, but beneath it, a new clarity began to emerge. I realized that while I could not control the diagnosis, I could control my response. I could decide how to face this challenge, what battles to fight, and how to reclaim the pieces of life that truly mattered. I remembered something my mother had once told me. Courage is not the absence of fear, Margaret, but the willingness to move forward despite it. Those words, long forgotten, felt alive now, echoing in my mind with a force I could not deny. I thought about my children, my grandchildren, Thomas, and all the moments still waiting to be experienced. I made a quiet, firm decision. I would not let this disease define me. I would fight, not just for survival, but for the life I had left to truly live. The next morning, I woke with a strange sense of purpose. The ache of fear was still there, the exhaustion of the past weeks palpable, but underneath it all, determination had taken root. I began small, researching my condition carefully, writing down questions for doctors, speaking openly with Thomas about my fears and hopes. I sought out friends who had faced similar struggles, drawing on their strength and experiences. Slowly, the fog of despair began to lift, replaced by a tentative sense of control. It wasn't immediate. Some days were dark, heavy with doubt and pain. But the key difference now was awareness. I could see the path forward, even if it was difficult, even if it demanded courage I didn't know I possessed. Every small choice became significant. Choosing to eat healthily, choosing to exercise gently, choosing to spend meaningful time with loved ones. Every act was a rebellion against fear, a declaration that I would not be defeated without a fight. The following weeks were some of the longest and most surreal of my life. I found myself moving through a strange haze of doctor visits, tests, and consultations, each one punctuated by the sterile smell of disinfectant, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights, and the muffled footsteps of nurses who had learned to treat patients with efficiency but not always with understanding of the emotional turbulence that lay beneath each patient's calm exterior. Dr. Harris was kind, patient, and careful to explain everything in terms I could understand. He outlined the options clearly: surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, and a host of other treatments, each with its own set of risks, side effects, and uncertain outcomes. He looked at me with a steady gaze and said something I would never forget. "Margaret, you have faced life with courage before. This will be no different. But the choice is yours. You have to decide how far you want to fight, and what quality of life means to you." I left the office that day with a sense of both dread and responsibility. The decision was mine. Entirely mine. And yet, I could feel the invisible weight of the world pressing on my shoulders. Not just the fear of the disease itself, but the knowledge that my choice would ripple through the lives of everyone I loved. Thomas, my children, my grandchildren. They all would feel the impact of whatever path I chose. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Life had handed me a moment of clarity. A crossroads. One path might prolong my life at the cost of comfort and joy. Another might allow me to savor the days I had left, even if fewer in number. But whichever path I chose, I would step into it fully aware of its consequences. That evening, I sat down with Thomas in our living room, the same place where we had shared countless evenings of quiet companionship. I took his hand in mine, feeling the warmth and strength that had been a constant in my life for over 50 years. "Thomas," I said slowly, "I need to talk about what comes next." My voice was calm, but underneath it, a storm of fear and uncertainty churned. We spoke for hours. I explained the options, my fears, and my desires. Thomas listened without interruption, offering comfort and wisdom in the quiet way he always had. There were tears, yes, and moments when words failed us. But there was also honesty, a deep, unflinching honesty that only comes when you confront life at its most fragile. In that conversation, I felt the first stirrings of clarity, a sense that the choice I was about to make would not only define my experience of the disease, but also define who I was in the final chapters of my life. Our children joined us soon after. Emily, Michael, and their spouses came into the living room, bringing with them warmth, concern, and gentle reassurance. We spoke candidly about the treatment options, the possible outcomes, and perhaps most importantly, about what I wanted. Not what was expected of me, not what others thought was best, but what I genuinely wanted for the rest of my days. The discussion was emotional, and there were moments of disagreement, moments of fear, and moments of profound love. And in that space, I realized something I had always known but never fully embraced. My life was my own, and the courage to face it fully rested in my own hands. Late one night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in the quiet of my bedroom. The moonlight spilled through the window, casting a soft silver glow across the room. I thought about the decades I had lived, the joys, the mistakes, the regrets, the triumphs. I thought about my grandchildren, their laughter, their curiosity, and their love. I thought about Thomas, whose quiet strength had carried me through more than I had realized. And I thought about myself, not as the frail woman the diagnosis seemed to define, but as Margaret Ellis, who had lived fully, loved fiercely, and learned courage in the ordinary moments of life. In that stillness, a revelation settled into my mind like sunlight breaking through clouds. I realized that I did not have to let fear dictate the terms of my remaining life. I could face the disease with awareness, determination, and, above all, a commitment to live fully, even if fully meant differently than it had before. I could choose not only to survive, but to embrace the days ahead with meaning, connection, and gratitude. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would fight in my own way, and I would do so with intention, clarity, and courage. The following days marked the beginning of my transformation. I began researching everything I could about my condition, not out of panic, but out of curiosity and determination. I spoke with other patients, joined support groups, and explored complementary therapies that could enhance my well-being alongside conventional treatment. I adjusted my daily routine, adding gentle exercise, mindfulness practices, and deliberate moments of joy and gratitude. Every decision was intentional, every action a declaration that I would not be defined by fear. Thomas became my partner not just in life but in this journey. We took long walks together, talking openly about our fears and hopes. I began journaling, writing letters to my children and grandchildren, capturing lessons learned and wisdom accumulated over decades. And in those moments of reflection, I began to understand something profound. Courage is not a one-time act, but a daily choice, a commitment to face life with honesty, love, and presence, even when the outcome is uncertain. As I navigated these first weeks of conscious action, I noticed subtle but powerful shifts within myself. Where there had been fear, there was now focus. Where there had been despair, there was now clarity. And where there had been isolation, there was now connection, both with Thomas and with the broader network of friends, family, and fellow survivors who shared their stories and lent their strength. I realized that the true battle was not only against the disease, but also against the fear and resignation that often accompany it. By confronting those inner challenges, I was reclaiming not just my life, but the essence of who I was: resilient, curious, and capable of profound love. The mornings after I made my decision were unlike any I had experienced before. Waking up no longer felt like a simple act of habit. It was a conscious choice to greet the day, to move through it with awareness, to honor the life I had been given. I would rise slowly, letting the sunlight pour over the curtains and warm my skin, feeling each breath as a gift rather than a simple function of survival. Thomas would make me tea, just as he had for decades, but now each sip tasted sweeter, heavier with significance, as if life itself had been distilled into the simple pleasure of a morning ritual. I began keeping a journal, though at first the pages felt intimidating, blank, like a mirror of my uncertainty. I wrote about my fears, yes, but I also wrote about small joys: the sound of birds in the garden, the smile of a grandchild, the gentle touch of Thomas's hand. Each word became an affirmation, a reminder that I was still present in this world, still capable of experiencing, of feeling, of loving. Writing allowed me to process the storm of emotions within me, to untangle the threads of fear, regret, and hope into something coherent and powerful. I began adjusting my routines in subtle, intentional ways. I started walking every morning, moving slowly but deliberately through the neighborhood, greeting neighbors and feeling the rhythm of my own heartbeat. Exercise had never been a central part of my life, but now I saw it as an act of rebellion against the disease. A declaration that my body, though fragile, was still capable of movement, of endurance, of strength. Meals became ritualized moments of nourishment, not only of the body but of the spirit. I learned to cook with intention, savoring the preparation, the colors of fresh vegetables, the aroma of herbs. Each meal was an act of gratitude, an acknowledgement that even amidst illness, life offered beauty and sustenance. Thomas joined me in the kitchen, offering laughter, conversation, and sometimes clumsy attempts at chopping onions, which only added to the joy of the process. The transformation was not mine alone. My family became a living, breathing part of this journey. My children visited more often, bringing not just their love but their wisdom, their humor, and their warmth. Emily would sit beside me, holding my hand, asking questions about my day, about my feelings, about my fears and triumphs. Michael would bring his children, letting them run through the garden while I watched, laughter filling the spaces that fear had once occupied. These moments were small but profound. Each hug, each shared story, each quiet conversation became a reminder of what truly mattered. The cancer diagnosis had forced us all to slow down, to confront what had been taken for granted, and to appreciate the fragility and beauty of each passing moment. Not every day was filled with clarity or joy. Some mornings brought fatigue that made walking a chore, evenings where the ache of my body reminded me of the battle I was facing. There were days when fear crept in, uninvited, whispering doubts and magnifying uncertainty. I cried in the dark of my bedroom, sometimes silently, sometimes with the volume of grief that only years of suppressed emotion can produce. Yet even in those moments, I noticed a change within myself. Where once despair might have consumed me, now I recognized it, accepted it, and let it pass. I learned that acknowledging vulnerability was not weakness, but strength, a way to face reality without losing sight of purpose. I began to see that resilience is built not in the absence of fear, but in the courage to move forward despite it. There were victories too, small but transformative. The first time I walked 2 miles without feeling exhausted, I celebrated quietly, savoring the rhythm of my own body. The first healthy meal I prepared without feeling overwhelmed, I savored with Thomas in the soft glow of the evening. Each time a test result came back favorable, I allowed myself a cautious celebration, a recognition that life, even in its uncertainty, could offer hope. I started practicing mindfulness, meditating in the early mornings, feeling my breath, my heartbeat, my presence in the world. These moments grounded me, reminding me that life is not only about survival but about presence, awareness, and connection. I learned to observe my thoughts without judgment, to accept each day as it came, and to let go of the relentless pressure to control what I could not. As the weeks passed, my reflections deepened. I thought about the friends I had lost, the parents I had buried, the siblings and cousins who had passed, and I realized that mortality is not a distant concept. It is a living presence that walks alongside each of us, shaping our choices, our priorities, our understanding of what truly matters. I reflected on love, the way it had shaped my life, guided my decisions, and cushioned my missteps. I remembered arguments I had held on to for years, regrets I had carried silently, moments where pride had prevented reconciliation. I began writing letters of apology and love to friends and family, not because I feared death, but because I had finally understood that words left unsaid weigh heavier than any physical burden. Through all of this, Thomas remained my anchor. His quiet strength, his patience, his unwavering presence provided the stability I needed to navigate uncertainty. Some nights we would sit together, talking for hours about memories, fears, and hopes. He never tried to fix me, never tried to remove the pain, but simply held space for my experiences. And in his presence, I felt safe to explore the depths of my emotions, to confront fear, to embrace hope. I also began exploring a deeper connection to life itself, a sense of spirituality, if not in a religious sense, then in a profound appreciation for existence. I marveled at the sunlight filtering through the trees, the way a bird hovered above the garden, the laughter of my grandchildren, the feel of wind against my skin. These moments, simple and fleeting, became sacred. They reminded me that life is composed not of monumental achievements alone, but of small, precious instants of awareness and joy. Seeking community became an important part of my journey. I joined a local support group for women my age facing similar diagnoses. Listening to their stories, their struggles, their triumphs, I felt less isolated and more empowered. We shared strategies for managing side effects, coping mechanisms for fear and anxiety, and most importantly, reminders that life could still be beautiful, meaningful, and rich, even amidst illness. By the third month into this journey, I noticed a profound shift in how I experienced each day. Gratitude became my guiding principle. I noted every small blessing, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, Thomas's quiet smile, the laughter of my grandchildren echoing through the garden. I learned to slow down, to truly see and feel what was around me. I had spent so many decades moving through life on autopilot, and now, confronted with the fragility of existence, I experienced each day with a fullness I had never known. Each evening, as I lay in bed, I reflected on the transformation unfolding within me. Fear still visited, but it no longer dominated my thoughts. Hope had taken root, courage had strengthened, and clarity had illuminated my purpose. I realized that while I could not predict the outcome of my illness, I could determine how I lived each day, how I nurtured relationships, and how I left my mark on those I loved. And in this awareness, I found peace, a peace born not from certainty, but from the deliberate choice to embrace life fully, with all its complexity, beauty, and impermanence. By the time I reached the 6th month of this journey, the transformation within me had become undeniable. The woman who had first received the diagnosis, a woman filled with shock, fear, and denial, was no longer the same. She had been stripped bare by the stark reality of mortality, and in that stripping, she had discovered something profound. The essence of life is not measured in years, or wealth, or even achievement, but in the depth of presence, the authenticity of love, and the courage to face oneself honestly. One of the earliest lessons I learned was the necessity of speaking what truly mattered. For decades, I had carried grudges, swallowed apologies, and left words unsaid out of pride or fear. Now, with the specter of mortality looming, silence became intolerable. I began writing letters to friends with whom I had lost touch, writing apologies for long-past misunderstandings, and expressing gratitude to those whose presence had enriched my life. Each letter was more than a message. It was a reconciliation with the past, a freeing of the soul from the chains of regret. I learned that to speak from the heart, even in vulnerability, is to honor life itself. And I found that those I reached out to often responded with equal honesty, gratitude, and connection, creating moments of profound healing that no medicine could replicate. Forgiveness became another cornerstone of my transformation. I forgave myself for mistakes, decisions made in ignorance, moments of weakness, opportunities wasted. I forgave those who had hurt me, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Forgiveness was not a single act but a continuous practice, something I returned to each day in meditation and reflection. It was a liberation from the weight of resentment, a shedding of burdens that had long overshadowed the light of my life. I remember one afternoon sitting on the porch, the sun warm on my skin, thinking of an old friend I had not spoken to in decades. I wrote a letter expressing my forgiveness and gratitude, and sent it without expectation. A week later, a response arrived, a note filled with tears, understanding, and shared reflection. That moment reinforced something essential. Life's value lies in connection, in reaching across time and distance to heal what has been broken, and in letting love flow freely, even when it feels risky. I began to notice gratitude everywhere. In the laughter of my grandchildren, in the quiet companionship of Thomas, in the simple act of breathing deeply on a cool morning. Each day, I made a deliberate effort to acknowledge these gifts, writing them in my journal, speaking them aloud, letting them permeate my consciousness. Gratitude became a shield against fear and despair, a constant reminder that even amidst illness, the world is rich with moments of beauty. I learned to savor the mundane, the smell of fresh bread baking, the sound of rain tapping on the windows, the warmth of a cozy blanket at night. Life had taught me that presence, not quantity of years, defines richness. By living fully in each moment, I reclaimed a vitality that illness had threatened to take away. The lessons extended deeply into my relationships. I realized that time spent with family is irreplaceable. I took deliberate steps to strengthen bonds, to listen more intently, to speak openly and honestly. I shared stories of my youth with my grandchildren, letting them see not just a grandmother, but a woman who had lived, erred, and learned. I laughed with them, cried with them, and marveled at the simple wonder in their eyes. Thomas and I deepened our companionship. The small gestures, holding hands, sharing morning coffee, lingering over quiet conversations, became sacred. We celebrated each day as a gift, conscious that life's brevity only intensified its beauty. I realized that love is not merely a feeling, but a series of intentional actions, a commitment renewed daily, often silently, often in the smallest ways. Fear was never completely absent. I faced nights of doubt, days of exhaustion, moments when the illness felt insurmountable. But now, fear was not a master. It was a companion, a signal to pause, reflect, and then act with intention. I discovered that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. Every small act of bravery, making a phone call, attending a doctor's appointment, going for a walk when my body felt weak, was a triumph. These moments accumulated, creating a foundation of confidence, resilience, and self-respect. I realized that life's true victories are often quiet, unseen, and internal. Facing mortality reshaped my perspective entirely. I had always believed I could postpone reflection, that time would always be plentiful. But illness made every moment precious, every conversation meaningful, every act significant. I learned to see beauty in impermanence, to embrace fragility as a teacher, and to treasure the present above all else. I thought of friends who had passed, of colleagues who had disappeared, of loved ones taken too soon. Each memory was a reminder that life is fleeting, that nothing should be postponed, and that the depth of experience matters far more than its duration. This awareness brought both a solemn reverence and a vibrant celebration of existence. In meditation and quiet reflection, I discovered an inner landscape that I had rarely explored. I confronted my fears, my regrets, my desires, and my sense of purpose. I found a serenity that was not naive or superficial, but earned through introspection, struggle, and conscious choice. My spirituality, not tied strictly to religion, became an appreciation for life itself, the interconnectedness of people, the wonder of nature, the unspoken beauty in ordinary moments. I realized that joy is not the absence of suffering, but the capacity to find light amidst darkness, to embrace life fully even when uncertainty looms. Each day became a practice in balance, acknowledging pain, embracing love, finding hope, and expressing gratitude. I began sharing my experiences with friends, neighbors, and younger women facing similar challenges. I spoke openly about fear, about choice, about living intentionally. I found that by articulating my journey, I not only helped others navigate their struggles, but reinforced my own transformation. Teaching, sharing, and guiding became acts of empowerment, reinforcing the lessons I had internalized. Presence, courage, gratitude, love, and intentionality. One evening, as the sun set over our garden, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I sat with Thomas, reflecting on the journey thus far. We spoke of the early days, the fear, the despair, and the decisions that had shaped this chapter of life. I realized that life had not been diminished by illness. It had been clarified. The distractions, the trivial grievances, the endless pursuit of perfection, all seemed insignificant compared to the richness of connection, the depth of presence, and the conscious embrace of life. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun, the touch of Thomas's hand, the gentle rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. And I understood, with an absolute certainty, that I was living fully, not because the illness had taken something from me, but because it had taught me what truly matters. As I approached the final months of my journey, I found a calm that had eluded me in the early days. It was not the calm of ignorance, nor the calm of resignation. It was the calm of understanding, of acceptance without surrender, of embracing life with clarity and intention. I had walked through fear, grief, regret, and uncertainty, and I had emerged not untouched, but profoundly transformed. I realized that life is not about the duration of days, but the depth of experiences, the authenticity of connections, and the courage to live fully in each moment. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, the sky outside painted in deep oranges and purples, Thomas turned to me with his usual quiet presence. "Margaret," he said softly, "you've changed. Not just because of the illness, but because you've truly embraced life." I smiled, feeling the weight of his words. "I suppose I've realized something important," I replied. "Life is fleeting, but the moments we fill with love, courage, and connection, they last beyond us. They become part of the lives we touch." He nodded, squeezing my hand. In that moment, I understood that my journey was not solely about surviving illness. It was about leaving behind a legacy of presence, awareness, and love. That legacy was not in grand gestures, but in daily choices, in words spoken and letters written, in laughter shared, and in the simple act of being fully present. I began to share my story openly, first with family, then with friends, and eventually with a broader community. I wanted others, especially women of my age, to see that it is never too late to reclaim agency over your life, to face fear with courage, and to live intentionally. I spoke at local gatherings, wrote letters, and even shared reflections online, emphasizing the lessons I had learned. Life is unpredictable, and mortality is a constant companion. Courage is a daily choice, not a single heroic act. Love and connection are life's most precious treasures. Gratitude and presence transform ordinary moments into extraordinary ones. Through sharing, I realized that my journey was not just personal, it was universal. The fears, regrets, and triumphs I had faced were reflections of human experience, and by voicing them, I could inspire, comfort, and guide others navigating their own uncertainties. Even in the shadow of illness, joy found its way into my life daily. I spent mornings in the garden, marveling at the resilience of flowers, their colors vivid against the green. I baked with my grandchildren, laughing at their curiosity and messy hands. I read books I had long postponed, savoring the words, the ideas, and the perspectives they offered. I traveled small distances with Thomas, visiting nearby towns, walking along the lakeshore, feeling the wind on my face and the warmth of the sun. Each trip was deliberate, each experience fully appreciated. I learned that joy is not the absence of struggle, but the recognition of beauty amidst it. Even a single shared smile, a quiet conversation, or a cup of tea could hold immeasurable meaning. As I reflected on my life, I began to consider the legacy I would leave behind. Not material possessions, but the imprint of love, courage, and wisdom. I wanted my children and grandchildren to understand that life is precious, that fear is natural but not absolute, and that every moment, no matter how small, carries the potential for meaning. I wrote letters to each of my grandchildren, sharing lessons learned, favorite memories, and heartfelt advice. I reminded them to be brave, to love fully, and to cherish time. I apologized for moments when I had faltered, forgave those who had hurt me, and expressed gratitude for the people and experiences that had shaped me. These letters were not simply for them. They were acts of closure, acts of reflection, acts of legacy. I do not pretend that every day was easy. There were moments of fear, fatigue, and sorrow. But with each passing week, I became increasingly at peace with life and its impermanence. I accepted that some things were beyond my control, and in doing so, I reclaimed power over the things I could influence. My mindset, my actions, my relationships, and my capacity to love. I came to understand that facing mortality is not about fearing the end, but about embracing the present. Every breath, every smile, every act of kindness is amplified when we recognize the fragility of life. And in this awareness, life itself becomes radiant, meaningful, and profound. If you are listening to my story, I want you to understand something fundamental. It is never too late to live fully. It is never too late to mend relationships, to speak your truth, to practice gratitude, to embrace courage, and to choose love above fear. Life's value is not in how long it lasts, but in how deeply it is experienced, how authentically it is lived, and how intentionally it is embraced. I hope that my journey inspires you to take deliberate steps toward presence, to cherish those you love, and to live each day with awareness. Do not wait for crises to teach these lessons. Practice them now. Speak the words that matter, forgive freely, love boldly, and never underestimate the power of your presence in the lives of others. As I sit now, pen in hand, journal open, and Thomas beside me, I feel a sense of completion. Not of the journey of life itself, that is unknowable, but of this chapter, this transformation, this awareness. The diagnosis that once seemed like a death sentence became a catalyst for rebirth, clarity, and purpose. The sun sets outside, painting the sky in hues of gold and lavender. I take Thomas's hand, breathe deeply, and smile. Life is fleeting, yes, but it is also extraordinary, luminous, and worth every moment of conscious, intentional living. And if my story teaches just one person to embrace life fully, to speak love openly, to forgive, and to live courageously, then it has fulfilled its purpose.